So, was the Prophet Muhammad actually foretold in the Bible? For centuries, this has been one of the most profound questions in interfaith theology. It's a really complex issue with deep roots in scripture and history, and believe me, it is still a point of serious discussion today. So, let's dive right in and explore the different perspectives.
Okay, so where does this whole conversation even begin? Well, it really kicks off right here, with this incredibly direct and powerful claim from the Quran itself. This verse is basically saying that Muhammad's arrival wasn't a surprise at all, but was actually written about in the holy books of Jews and Christians.
And look, this isn't just some small detail. It is a huge foundational belief within Islam. The whole idea that Muhammad's mission is just part of this long, continuous chain of prophecy, stretching all the way back through Jesus, Moses, and Abraham, that is absolutely central to the Islamic worldview, and really sets the stage for the entire debate we're about to unpack.
So you might be asking, where exactly do Islamic scholars see these prophecies? Well, one of the main places they point to is a passage in the book of Deuteronomy in the Old Testament. Let's break down their argument, piece by piece.
Okay, so the core of the argument really comes down to how you interpret one key word, brethren. The verse promises a prophet will come from among the brethren of the Israelites. So who are the brethren? Well, Islamic scholar Dr. Jamal Badawi makes the case that this is talking about the Ishmaelites, who are the descendants of Abraham's first son Ishmael. And since Prophet Muhammad descended from that line, the argument goes that he is the prophet being described.
And to back this up, Dr. Badawi lays out this really interesting side-by-side comparison. The prophecy says, a prophet like unto Moses, right? So let's look at this chart. When you compare things like their birth, family life, their careers as both a prophet and a statesman, and their deaths, he argues that Muhammad's life mirrors Moses's way more closely than Jesus's does, whose life was, unique in a lot of these ways.
And here is the final piece of the puzzle for the Islamic argument. The verse says, God will put my words in his mouth. For Muslims, this is a perfect description of how the Quran was revealed. The belief is that the literal words of God were dictated by the angel Gabriel to an unlettered prophet Muhammad, who then recited them exactly as he heard them. It's a pretty powerful connection.
But of course, that is only one side of the story. For almost 2,000 years, Christians have read that exact same passage from Deuteronomy and come to a completely different conclusion. For them, it's all about a prophecy fulfilled in Jesus.
So from the Christian point of view, where's the proof? Well, they say you don't have to look any further than the New Testament itself. In the book of Acts, the Apostle Peter is quoted saying flat out that this prophecy from Deuteronomy is about Jesus. So for Christians, Scripture interprets Scripture, and the case is pretty much closed. The prophet like unto Moses was Jesus of Nazareth.
Okay, so what about that like unto Moses comparison? How do Christians handle that? Well, author Wayne Jackson points out a ton of significant parallels. Think about it. Kings tried to destroy both of them when they were babies. Both were sent by God to be deliverers. Both performed miracles. Both acted as mediators for their people. They even both provided a kind of heavenly bread. The key takeaway here is that from this perspective, the similarities are profound and theological, not just about, surface-level life events.
And then there's another twist. Christian apologists will actually point to a verse in the Quran itself. They argue that Surah 29:27 seems to grant prophethood and revelation specifically to the descendants of Isaac and Jacob. That's the Israelite line. And if that's the case, they argue, it would exclude the Ishmaelite line that Muhammad came from. So yeah, that adds a whole other layer of complexity to this discussion.
Now, you might think this debate has always been the same, but that is not true at all. What's really fascinating is just how much Christian views of Muhammad have changed dramatically over the centuries. This has been anything but a static argument.
Just look at this timeline. Back in the medieval period, the view in Europe was often that Muhammad was an imposter. Some even said he was a frustrated Roman cardinal, believe it or not. But then you fast forward to the Enlightenment and things start to shift. You've got thinkers like Edward Gibbon calling him a great legislator. Voltaire uses him as a symbol of fanaticism, but then others see him as a kind of anti-establishment reformer. And by the time we hit the 20th century, the tone shifts again towards a more respectful dialogue. It just goes to show you these perceptions are never really set in stone.
So all this historical change has led some modern theologians to step back and ask a different kind of question. What if this isn't a simple yes or no answer? What if there's a third way to look at the whole idea of prophecy?
Enter the theologian Anna Moreland. She suggests this new category, thinking of Muhammad as a religious prophet.
Now, hold on, this doesn't mean what you might think. It's not about accepting the full Islamic belief that he's the final prophet for everyone. It's more of an attempt to carve out a new space within Christian thought, a way to acknowledge the prophetic insights in his message, but to understand them through a Christian lens.
So let's make sure we're super clear on the difference here. The full Islamic view is that Muhammad is the final prophet and his message is universal. This analogical view that Moreland suggests is different. It's saying Christians can see him as a prophet, but in a more qualified sense, one that doesn't replace Christian beliefs, but is sort of understood alongside them. It's a really subtle but very important theological maneuver.
But the big question is, does this third way really satisfy anyone? You've got critics on both sides. On the one hand, many Muslims might feel this waters down the meaning of prophet until it's almost meaningless. And on the other hand, some Christians might feel it's giving away too much, blurring lines that they believe should stay clear. It is a really, really tough needle to thread.
And that really brings us right up to today. This question that's been around for centuries? Yeah, it's not like there's a neat and tidy answer. Instead, what you see happening is a shift in focus, from this head-to-head debate to something more like an open, ongoing dialogue.
Because at the end of the day, at the very center of this entire conversation is the figure of Muhammad, and really understanding how he's seen from all these different angles, scripturally, historically, theologically, that is just crucial if you want to have any kind of meaningful conversation between these two great world faiths.
So, just to quickly recap what we've covered, we've really looked at three very different perspectives. First, the Islamic view, Muhammad as the foretold messenger. Second, the classic Christian view, Jesus is the one who fulfilled that prophecy. And third, this more modern theological approach that's trying to find a new way to understand it all.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. In our world today, where different faiths are constantly interacting, sometimes bumping up against each other, maybe the most important question isn't about proving who's right and who's wrong. Perhaps it's about trying to genuinely understand where other people are coming from and asking ourselves, what does it really take to find common ground, or even just mutual respect when we're right in the middle of a profound disagreement?